The MCAT CARS podcast, session number 9. The CARS section of the MCAT gives thousands of pre-meds nightmares every night. Whether you're an ESL student, lack confidence while reading, or are a slow reader like me, Jack Westin and the medical school headquarters are here to help you score higher in every section so you can be confident you are ready to get the MCAT score of your dreams. Welcome back to the MCAT CARS podcast. My name is Dr. Ryan Gray, your host here every week. If you are new to the podcasting world, if somebody turns you on to the MCAT CARS podcast, and this is the first podcast that you are listening to, I encourage you to check out mededmedia.com, and specifically the pre-med years, where I break down not only MCAT stuff, like I had Jack Westin on that podcast as well a while ago, but also the application, writing your personal statement, preparing for the interview, and so much more. Again, that's mededmedia.com. This week, Jack and I are breaking down a Guardian article about how books are getting a little long. All right, Jack, back with some more MCAT CARS podcast fun. How are you today?
I'm doing great. How are you?
I am excellent. We've been going back and forth with some hard passages and easy passages and more hard passages, and we're back for some more. What do we have in store today?
Yeah, I mean, every passage we've looked at has been challenging in some way, and we've tried to hit on passages that show you different perspectives on how to explain things. And this one is similar to a recent one we've looked at in that it just tells you their opinion, kind of like the one we just looked at in our last week's session. So, it's very similar in that it'll present the author's opinion and in a way that may confuse you unless you're reading it carefully. So this one, again, is based on literature. It's not going to be fun to read, most likely, unless you have an open mind. And hopefully we'll learn something new.
Hopefully. But either way, we're going to have fun.
Yes.
All right. At 500 pages, the overstory is a, quote, majestic redwood of a novel. All right. So 500 pages, the overstory is a, quote, majestic redwood of a novel. It's interesting. The author is quoting majestic redwood, so I'm not sure if he really thinks that or doesn't, or if he's just quoting it because it's a very fancy words.
Right.
So I'm not sure if the author likes the overstory or not.
Right. We don't know like how the author really perceives it. Majestic redwood. Majestic sounds like a good thing, but why is it quoted? That's kind of weird. Maybe it's someone else's point of view, right? We don't know exactly. But it does say it's 500 pages. Okay, go ahead.
And redwood, the other word there, redwood. Redwoods are really big, so he's maybe comparing it to really big trees. I don't know. Or it took a redwood to print that many pages. Its place on this week's Man Booker shortlist is a testament that long books are fine by the judges. So the author is saying that this book, The Overstory, was on some sort of list, a short list, and apparently the judges don't mind that it's 500 pages.
That's it.
It's the long-winded ones they rejected. We occasionally felt that inside the book we read was a better one, sometimes a thinner one, wildly signaling to be let out, said Kwame Anthony Appiah, their chairman. So this new person we're introduced to, Kwame Anthony Appiah, is saying that long-winded books are rejected because there's a thinner book, a better book inside that should have been written.
Yeah, that's it. So maybe the length of the book is not a problem, but instead, we don't want confusing books, right? Mm-hmm. Long-winded can mean confusing, can mean many things, but basically the author is trying to say that they don't reject long books. They reject other kinds of characteristics of books. So the big picture here is basically long books are good. Right?
As long as they're not long-winded.
As long as they're not long-winded, right.
Yeah. Okay. Most readers can empathize and may feel that the word, quote, occasionally was tactful. So may feel the word occasionally was tactful. So I'm not following along. Oh, so this would be hard for me as I'm reading the MCAT, because this is a new paragraph, and the sentence is saying, the author is saying, most readers can empathize and may feel that the word, quote, occasionally was tactful. And as I'm reading this, I'd go, where did occasionally come from? But it was set up in the quote above by Kwame. We, quote, occasionally felt that inside the book. I'm assuming that's where occasionally is where they're bringing it up from.
Yeah, the author is just talking about Anthony Appiah's viewpoint.
Yeah.
Right? The quote.
Okay. Wow. So that's interesting. So it's a new paragraph, and they're drawing upon the old one. So that would confuse me. Okay. One book survey found that the average number of pages had increased from 320 to 400 pages between 1999 and 2014. And so just the author is throwing out a stat about how books are becoming bigger. Longer.
Right. And just to point out, that first sentence was not really important. The fact that the author is trying to say, look, that word occasionally that Anthony Appiah said is tactful or was tactful. I mean, that's like a word that means strategic or skilled or something. But that doesn't really make a big difference as to what's going on in the second sentence. So that first sentence is really just a transition, right? It doesn't seem to be that important. What is the second sentence saying?
Oh man, the second sentence is it's just giving me a stat, right? It's not really telling me anything other than books are getting bigger.
That's it.
Yeah. Okay. I got confused for a second. I'm like, is there something else I'm supposed to be reading into this?
No, that's it. Increased from 320 to 400.
Okay. All right. Some think that the shift to digital formats has contributed, not least in removing the fear of being crushed beneath your duvet by your bedtime reading. Interesting. Okay, so the author is saying that some people think that books are getting bigger because we're not printing as many books, that they're just digital, and so it's not a bigger physical book. It's just more digital pages.
Yeah, the digital factor allows us to make longer books.
Yeah.
Right. That's maybe a reason as to why it's getting longer.
Okay. Val McDermott, so another name, another of the judges, cited the inexperience of editors, commercial pressures which deny them the time they need to spend on books, and the unwillingness of writers to listen. So the author in the previous sentence is saying, well, maybe, or is saying that some people think that it's the shift to digital that is contributing to longer books. Val McDermott, who's a judge, is saying that it's the editors, it's commercial pressures, and unwillingness of writers to listen. So she's offering a different point of view as to why books are getting longer.
That's it, and we should know McDermott said that, right? Keep in mind, a lot of students will read that the prior sentence, the one with the duvet, and be lost, right? So let's read that one a little bit more carefully. So some think that the shift to digital formats has contributed. That's what matters. That part matters, because that's telling us that some people think it's because of this transition to digital. The rest is not so important to understand, but we can try to understand it, not least in removing the fear of being crushed beneath your duvet. A lot of students will read that and go, what? What's going on there? Basically, as we all know, books are really, just physical stuff, right? Paper. And if they're really long, the author is trying to jokingly say that, big books can crush us, right? If they're huge. Now that we have this digital format, we don't have that fear, right? Which is kind of funny, right? Mm. Okay. Sounds good. So yeah, the next sentence discusses the fact that, maybe it's because of their editors, they don't have experience, or commercial pressures, which allow them to which reduce their amount of time they can edit the book, or spend time on it, and their inability to listen. Okay, sounds good.
The phenomenon of, quote, book inflation over careers has been noted. The last part of Karl Ove Knausgaard's My Struggle runs to almost 1,200 pages, and Paul Austier's most recent novel, 4321, is almost as long as his previous 3 books put together. The author is just pointing out some books that, some authors specifically, whose books are getting really big, and they're making a point to show how it's over a career.
Excellent point. Over a career. So it seems like as you keep writing, you end up writing longer and longer books.
Mm-hmm. All right, so the next sentence, the approving may credit increased boldness and mastery of material. So the author is saying, well, maybe the books are getting longer as somebody progresses through their career because they're becoming more bold and they know the material better, and so they can write more about it.
Excellent.
The unimpressed blame growing authorial egos. And so those who don't like the books becoming bigger and bigger, the unimpressed, just think it's the author's egos that they just want to write more and more and more.
Which one do you think it is? Do you think it's the egos, or is it their mastery of the material?
Ooh, well, I'm not supposed to read into it, so I'm just reading whatever I'm reading. I don't want to make any assumptions.
Well, here's the thing. There's a difference between making an assumption and agreeing or disagreeing with the opinion made.
Okay.
Right. So, like you giving your opinion on whether you think it's this way or that way,
yeah,
is totally fine.
Yeah.
Right. So I like to say, look, you're conversing with the author. Like, enjoy what you're reading, right? Converse with the author, right? But that, like, if me and you argued about whether we should play basketball or soccer, right? And I say, oh, we should play basketball today, right? And you're like, oh, let's play soccer. That doesn't make it so, like, you shouldn't change your opinion about, like, you shouldn't change your interpretation of my opinion because of, that argument, right? You're always going to think that I like to play basketball, right? So, just because you're arguing or trying to debate or converse with the author does not make it so that you change the author's opinion, right? And hopefully that's what's going to happen.
Okay.
But when you answer questions, you don't want your opinion there, right? You don't want your take on it there. You want to feel like you are the author. So when you're reading, challenge the author if you want to. It keeps you more engaged. But when you answer questions, you want to be the author. You don't want to bring in your own opinions when you answer questions.
Okay. So to answer your question, I think it's probably a little bit of both. Boldness and mastery of material and a little bit of ego. Yeah.
I agree.
Okay.
And knowing that, making us think of that will allow us to remember this a lot better.
Okay. Good little trick there. Writers are not the only ones reluctant to kill their darlings. So the author is bringing in potentially other people whose works are getting longer and longer, that, quote, kill their darlings, not being able to trim down their work.
Okay.
Director's cuts tend to expand rather than contract movies. So the author is now bringing in, instead of authors, bringing in directors of movies and showing us that director's cuts are usually longer as well.
Sounds good.
Viewers of Apocalypse Now, Redux, 49 minutes longer than the lengthy original, can testify that there's sometimes good reason for studios to interfere with a creative vision. So the author is bringing in one specific movie that's 49 minutes longer and is potentially showing that there's good reason that it was edited down. So I think the author would say that the director's cut wasn't good 49 minutes longer.
Probably, right?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yet executives, too, can overrate the long and sprawling. Executives of movies studios? What executives? I'm confused.
Well, yeah, so probably movies, because we're talking about movies.
Yeah.
Right? And they can overrate. So what does that mean? They prefer or don't prefer?
They prefer.
Probably prefer.
Yeah.
Right? They overrate it. They like it more. Okay, so what is this paragraph? What's the big picture of this paragraph?
That it's not just books. Movies are getting longer too.
That's it. Now, the first sentence of this paragraph may be challenging for some students. Writers are not the only ones reluctant. So that means writers are hesitant. Reluctant is another way of saying it is hesitant, right? To kill their darlings. So killing their darlings refers to the fact that you're shortening your books. Kill as in shortening, darlings as in your own work, right? Your pieces of work are darlings, quote unquote, we like to say. So yeah, okay, sounds good.
One culprit can be the misguided sense that volume equals value for money. And so the author is bringing in maybe why things are getting longer and that longer equals more value.
Yes.
Okay. Another is the odd association between physical heft and artistic or intellectual merit. Quote, weighty is a compliment. Quote, slight is an insult. So another point of view potentially the author is saying is that bigger books, longer movies are seen as more artistic, as seen as better. Yeah,
they have greater intellectual merit, right? So it seems like they're smarter, they're better in some way. And they also they're valued more, right? In terms of compensation, they're worth more when they're longer. Mm-hmm. So these are, again, other reasons why maybe books are longer. Okay. Or films or whatever.
Mm-hmm. One film critic says that studios fear shorter movies will not be deemed worthy of Oscars. So there's a critic out there who's saying that shorter movies aren't worthy of awards.
Right, and that goes with the idea of intellectual merit, mm-hmm. right? Oscars are intellectual merits, right? So if they're not long, maybe they're not seen in a very positive way, in an intellectually positive way. Mm. Okay.
The very term, the great American novel, suggests a certain size, though that was not the original intent. So the author is bringing in this term, great American novel, and saying that the term isn't supposed to imply any sort of size.
Right, but it ends up doing so.
Yeah.
Right? So it wasn't the original intent, but the fact that it's a great, kind of signifies maybe it's really big, and that's maybe a good thing.
Okay. So the takeaway from this paragraph is people think bigger is better.
Yeah. Now, what is the author's opinion so far? Do we not know?
I don't think we know. He's pointing out other people's thoughts.
That's it. So the author is being very neutral, just pointing out other perspectives, kind of like the previous week's the prior week's passage or article. It's just pointing out what it looks like in society. Okay.
That may be partly the legacy of doorstop classics, Moby Dick, Middlemarch, and Crime and Punishment. So the author is pointing to 3 books here. And the word doorstop classics, I'm assuming that the author is saying, hey, these are really big books. They can be used as doorstops.
Yeah.
Okay. That can be confusing.
Yeah, well, you don't really need to know that, but that is how they're kind of, perceiving it here. It's just talking about the legacy of these books, right? The legacy is what I would focus on.
Mm-hmm. Okay. It's not a purely Western phenomenon. China's beloved The Story of the Stone runs to 120 chapters. So the author is pointing out the fact that it's not just the, quote, great American novel, just American works of art, but also it's happening in China as well. Ulysses needs all of its 700-plus pages to capture a single day, while War and Peace, at over 1,200, ranges over 15 years, 5 families, domestic drama, and grand historical events. So just pointing out more works of art that are really long. Readers gallop through Elena Ferrante's Neapolitan Quartet, regarded by its author as a single novel. While short books don't always keep their readers, A Brief History of Time, despite living up to its titular promise, was bought much more than read. Wow. So again, more just examples of books and long books, short books, maybe.
Yes. What is this short book? A Brief History of Time, right? Despite living up to its titular promise, was bought much more than read. Why was it bought much more than read?
Maybe it was bought because it was short, and so people wanted to read it.
Right, well, it was bought, but it wasn't necessarily read. So yeah, maybe it was one of those books that wasn't so long, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, okay.
But Persuasion, one of Jane Austen's shorter novels, is arguably her best. So the author is pointing out that this one author who has many novels wrote a shorter novel that is probably arguably one of her best. So not necessarily longer is better. Virginia Woolf's groundbreaking Mrs. Dalloway is not much over 200 pages. So again, another example of a book, not very long. Rather, a single Boshu haiku than the 1,150-plus pages of James Clavell's Shogun. So again, just pointing out that there's haiku versus this 1,150-page novel.
Yeah, you don't need to know what haiku is, right? But
Yeah.
you just have to realize it's maybe a sample or, an hors d'oeuvre relative to this huge, thing. This 1,200 1,200 plus pages. So it's very small, right? Relative to this other book.
Yeah.
So that's how they perceive this haiku thing. Okay.
The long and short of it is that authors must earn their length. So it's funny that the whole paragraph is all of these different names of novels and this and that, and then it comes down to what I assume is the real takeaway is that short or long, the authors need to write a good book. They need to earn their length.
Right. So it's kind of suggesting that it can be like longer as long as it's good, right? So exactly. Older works of literature were often long, right? So like Moby Dick, Middlemarch, etc. And it can be longer as long as it's good, right? And it's kind of hard to see that last part, but you should know that like to earn your length, right? It's got to be pretty good, right? You got to earn it. It's got to be good for you to have longer books. All right, so what's the main takeaway here of the whole passage? What should you know?
We should know that books are getting longer, and that's not necessarily a good thing. That at the end of the day, that the writer needs to write a good book, needs to earn their length. Yeah,
that's it. Your books are getting longer. Pretty easy argument, right, to make, but the author presented it in such a convoluted way, right? Like, why didn't the author just say books are getting longer? Right? Like,
I know the one sentence could have been the whole thing.
Exactly, and that's what CARS does. They make it so dense and convoluted, but at the end of the day, it's just a simple argument, right? Simple idea. Books are getting longer, and you use that to help you. And, get the questions right. Sounds good. I mean, this was an example of a passage where the author doesn't necessarily give us his or her opinion, but just tells us what it is, right? As he or she sees it. And we don't always have passages with arguments that the author passionately agrees with or disagrees with. But the author is arguing here that books are getting longer. And whether that's a good thing or a bad thing, that's up for debate.
All right, so there you have it. The Overstory, the majestic redwood. Oh, man. These passages, these articles are hard. Again, this was a Guardian article. If you want to follow along with the articles that we have, you can go to MCATCarsPodcast.com, go to the episode that you are looking for, and you can follow along in our blog post specifically for that episode. If you're looking for some more practice, some more free practice go check out the free daily CARS MCAT questions from Jack Westin at medicalschoolhq.net/Jack Westin, or text the word MCAT CARS to 44222. Hope you have a great week. Don't forget to subscribe in your podcast player of choice. And if you're new to podcasts, if you're just checking us out on a webpage, you can subscribe in Apple Podcasts on your iOS device, in Google Podcasts on your Android device, or if you are a Spotify user, you can find us in Spotify by searching for MCAT CARS and clicking follow. Hope you have a great week. We'll see you next time here on the MCAT CARS podcast. When you use the links provided in this podcast, you're helping to support MedEd Media and the podcasts that we produce. Not only do you get a discount, but we earn a small commission as well. Thank you for your support. We occasionally felt that inside the book was a better one. About that.
Inside the book we read was a better one, yeah.
We occasionally felt that inside the book we read was a... Oh, okay. See, this is why I'm a bad reader.
No, this is just hard, you know?
Yeah.
I don't think you're a bad reader at all. I think it's just a hard thing to read, and it requires you to keep track of what we were talking about before.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. All right, let me get back. Where'd it go? Oh, there it is.